Hello, this is again Dr. Jonathan Bentovish, and I'm recording today following the publication of God's Physics book by iUniverse.com. I'm recording today a special presentation entitled An Urgent Call for Universities, leading universities, to validate this new God's Physics 21st century paradigm. In continuation to my last presentations, online videos, conference opening lectures, over 50 peer-reviewed scientific articles, 2 special issues that have been published. This is today being accepted more and more. This new God's Physics paradigm is being accepted today more and more by the scientific community as the new 21st century scientific paradigm, in a sense embedding, replacing, transcending the old paradigm, material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. I'd like to mention again that Einstein, the great scientist, considered one of the 2 greatest scientists the world has ever known. Einstein, when was asked about 100 years ago what would he wish for the fate of his relativity theory, general relativity theory, what would he wish for the fate of relativity theory to be in 100 years, in our time? Does he think that relativity theory would stand and hold true forever? And Einstein, being a great scientist, very humble scientist, said that he does not think that relativity theory would hold true forever. He said that he realizes that science advances and human knowledge advances, our understanding of the reality of the truth evolves. So he said, I only wish for my relativity theory to become a special case in a broader theoretical understanding. And that's exactly what's happening now with God's Physics new paradigm, again being accepted more and more by the mainstream, by major institutions as the new paradigm for 21st century physics, theoretical physics. Because to recapitulate, the basic contradiction that exists between relativity theory about the macroscopic universe and quantum mechanics about the microscopic universe, the subatomic realm, there is a basic contradiction between these 2 theories, and that is one of the hallmarks that led, in a sense, to God's Physics new paradigm, because as Thomas Kuhn, the famous philosopher of science, taught us in the last century, that when science evolves, it reaches a state in which a certain paradigm, in this case the old paradigm of 20th century material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, that old paradigm, in a sense, doesn't suffice any longer. It's too limited. And one of the hallmarks is a basic contradiction between the pillars of that old paradigm, between relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And in addition, we find that the old paradigm cannot account, in a sense, for up to 95% of the mass and energy in the universe, which is hypothesized to comprise dark matter, dark energy, but yet could not be detected even after 2 decades of scientific intense investigation trying to detect that elusive and in fact non-existent dark matter and dark energy hypothetical concepts. So that state in which we exist, or that state which we are just passing through, of a paradigmatic crisis of the old paradigm of relativity theory, quantum mechanics, the old material causal paradigm, that leads to a new paradigm. That new paradigm is God's Physics paradigm. It's been called before the computational unified field theory, which I termed this theory in respect and great admiration for Einstein's visionary quest for a unifying field theory, long before this theory was discovered. And even though he was somewhat criticized and even mocked for his visionary quest for such a unifying field theory, in fact, he was correct. So I called the theory initially the computational unified field theory. Recently, it's been called God's Physics, and this new paradigm has been shown beyond doubt that it can resolve the theoretical inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics by discovering making a major discovery of the existence of a singular, higher ordered, universal computational slash consciousness principle, UCP, that UCP computes simultaneously the whole universe at the incredible and unfathomable rate of c squared divided by Planck's constant, which gives us 1.36 in the power of minus 50 per second. So many trillions of times per second does that UCP, higher ordered singular computational or universal consciousness principle, computes the whole universe as a series of frames. I've given the cinematic film metaphor because it's somewhat is equivalent to this process of the UCP producing the universe, in the same way that we can see in a film that we have a succession of many film frames, and it happens so quickly for the naked human eye that we do not notice that, and we foresee or we perceive a constant reality with planes zooming through the screen, birds flying, etc. So it looks like a real reality, a continuous reality, but in fact it's not a continuous reality. So the cinematic film metaphor, for many considerations, shows us some similarities regarding how the UCP produces the universe, appearing to be a continuous reality, but it's not a continuous reality. And in fact, in between every two consecutive universal frames of the whole universe being computed simultaneously by the UCP, between every two consecutive universal frames, there is a dissolution of the whole universe back into this UCP, higher ordered singular computational principle. And so at every trillionth of a trillionth, etc., of a second, this UCP produces the whole universe as a frame, as a universal frame, and then it dissolves back into the UCP, and then repeats itself. And each frame, in fact, is produced simultaneously by the UCP and is evolved by the UCP. I've called cosmologists and astronomers just now, recently, on the Jewish Rosh Hashanah, which this year occurred on the 7th and 8th of September. I've called astronomers and cosmologists all over the world. I've lectured about this, presented presentations, special issues, over 50 peer-reviewed articles. I've called cosmologists and astronomers to test this critical prediction of the new God's physics paradigm for 21st century. And I've stated that the validation of this unique critical prediction of God's physics new paradigm is equivalent to Eddington's verification of Einstein's general relativity theory back in 1919, solar eclipse, when Eddington verified a unique prediction of Einstein's general relativity theory regarding the double-valued pathway, perihelion pathway of Mercury around the Sun. And when, in fact, Eddington verified that Einstein's value was correct at 1.6 as opposed to the 0.8 of Newton's classical mechanics, Einstein's general relativity theory became the accepted, across the board, the accepted new paradigm, general relativity theory for 20th century physics. And what we're standing at this point is exactly happening in the same manner. So I've called astronomers, cosmologists all over the world, and I'm still waiting for results to come in. I know that cosmologists and astronomers have been carrying out this critical prediction, and I'm anticipating eagerly to get the results. But in any event, that's one of 2 or 3 critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm, which again is being accepted more and more across the board as the new paradigm for 21st century physics. And again, the reason that I'm also recording this presentation is to call the leading universities in the world to communicate with me. I will state my personal email, and I will also leave it in the text. So my personal email is all lowercase letters, Dr. For Doctor, Dr. Bentwich, Bentwich, DrBentwich at gmail.com. And I'm calling the leading universities in the world, physics universities, to communicate directly with me in order to advance the validation and the further scientific, rigorous research and validation of this new, exciting 21st century scientific paradigm, which is called God's physics. So one prediction that I was calling cosmologists and astronomers to carry out is this Jewish Rosh Hashanah New Year 2 days sensitive time interval, in which the prediction of this new God's physics paradigm, which is completely different than the old material causal prediction, the prediction of the new God's physics paradigm is that during this 2 days time interval, which I call a collective human consciousness focus, when millions of Jews all around the world focus on this singular universal consciousness reality, in religious terms we would call it God, but in any event, the focus, the collective human consciousness of millions of Jews around the world during the Rosh Hashanah Jewish New Year time interval, 7th and 8th of September this year, would bring about, according to this new God's physics paradigm for 21st century, would bring about a non-continuous leap in the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. And again, to contrast it with the corresponding prediction of the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, well, the major problem, one of the major signs, alarming signs for the crisis, the paradigmatic crisis of the old material causal paradigm is exactly related to that. The accelerated rate of the universe's expansion, the only way that the old material causal paradigm can explain that is by hypothesizing that there exists dark matter, dark energy, which are assumed to comprise up to 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe. And beyond the fact that no science would accept a situation that for 2 decades you have many scientific teams venturing out, seeking this hypothetical, elusive dark matter, dark energy concepts, and yet they cannot be found. So science, as Thomas Kuhn tells us, then is looking out for a new paradigm that would offer an alternative explanation. But in any event, what I'm saying is that the prediction of the old material causal paradigm is that the accelerated expansion of the universe is continuous, essentially, because the dark matter, dark energy concept, which again cannot be found, and the new God's physics paradigm cancels them altogether, same way that Einstein canceled the ether concept, which could not be found. But regardless, when we're speaking about the specific prediction of the new God's physics paradigm, contrasting it to the prediction of the old material causal paradigm, just as in the case of Einstein's prediction that Eddington verified, we look at two different predictions. The new God's physics prediction is saying when we have a collective human consciousness, such as in the Jewish Rosh Hashanah New Year 2 days time interval, there would be a non-continuous leap increase in the rate of the universe's expansion rate. The old model says, no, the acceleration rate is constant because there is dark matter, dark energy, again, regardless of the fact that they cannot be found or are highly questionable. But according to the old material causal paradigm, there exist those dark matter, dark energy hypothetical concepts, and they're accelerating, they're propelling the galaxies apart from each other at a constant accelerated rate. There's no non-continuous leap, and for sure it's not related to any collective human consciousness focus. So to the extent when I'm eagerly expecting to get results from cosmologists and astronomers that have tested this critical prediction, and if in fact and when we obtain those results that show that during the Jewish Rosh Hashanah 2 days collective human consciousness focus, there has been indeed a non-continuous leap in the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion, that would be an unequivocal proof and validation of the new God's physics paradigm, and that would lead the scientific community that is in any event embracing this new God's physics paradigm more and more, but that would be a conclusive validation of the new God's physics paradigm as the valid new paradigm for 21st century physics. And gladly we see that, as in the case of Einstein's relativity theory, general relativity theory, which included Newtonian mechanics, and Maxwellian's theory included Newtonian mechanics as a special case within the new broader understanding, and that's exactly what Einstein has wished for, as I stated earlier, for his relativity theory. So in this case, once there is a conclusive validation of the new God's physics paradigm through the Rosh Hashanah non-continuous increase in the universe's accelerated rate of expansion, then gladly we would see what we've already seen, that general relativity theory and quantum mechanics are embedded as special cases within this broader theoretical understanding. I will talk about it in a second. I want to highlight again, because the topic of this video, this very important video, is an urgent call for leading universities, physics universities in the world, to communicate with me. Again, my personal email is drbentwich, DRBENTWICH, at gmail.com, to communicate with me directly, both regarding the results of the astronomers and cosmologists that have tested this critical prediction of Rosh Hashanah, and both regarding another critical prediction that I've published, and I'm going to state that again here. So because the topic of this video is to call the leading physics universities to communicate and collaborate with me directly, and allow me to validate and further investigate and advance the world's new God's physics paradigm. So therefore, I want to state the second critical prediction, unique critical prediction of God's physics paradigm. Again, that was published many times, but I'm going to state that. So the other critical prediction of God's physics new 21st century paradigm is that because the whole concept, the whole definition of space-time, energy, and mass changes completely, and it's a very exciting and profound development in physics, which I'm going to speak about briefly in a second. But because the definition, the computational definitions of space-time, energy, and mass are altered, space-time, energy, and mass, according to the new God's physics paradigm, are computed simultaneously by the singular higher-ordered universal computational slash consciousness principle, again at the incredible rate of many trillions times per second. For each exhaustive pixel in the universe, this singular higher-ordered UCP is computing space-time, energy, and mass, and it's computing it based on its a computation of the degree of consistency or inconsistency of that spatial pixel's values relative to the entire frame, or relative to itself, to the composition of that pixel, that object, across frames. It's a very elaborate subject, but in any event, and again, I've published over 50 peer-reviewed articles, 2 special issues, opened international physics conferences as a keynote lecture about this new paradigm. But in essence, the computational definitions of space-time, energy, and mass have changed dramatically, because now they're being seen or understood as being computed by the UCP. So one of the ramifications of this new breakthrough, major breakthrough in physics and in science, is that the UCP computes mass, for example, as the degree of an object consistency measures across frames. So that means that according to this new God's physics paradigm, one of the second critical prediction is that if we take a massive particle, a relatively more massive particle such as the muon, relative to the electron, the muon is about 100 times more massive than the electron, they're both negatively charged. If we want to compare, according to the new God's physics paradigm, the appearance or detection of a more massive particle such as the muon relative to the detection of a less massive particle such as the electron across a series of universal frames, we would find a new unique prediction for the God's physics paradigm, which is that the more massive particle, i.e. the muon, would be detected across a much greater percentage of the universal frames than the electron. In other words, if I had to equate it to a film, in a cinematic, that's by the way, that's one of the differences between or dissimilarities between the cinematic film metaphor and the actual production of the universe by the UCP. Because one of the things that we see is that if you see a film, a cinematic film, you'd see, for example, a person such as myself sitting with a table and a desk and a chair and pictures behind me, a picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe behind me, and you'd see all the elements in the film. They would repeat themselves from one frame to another, at least the inanimate objects such as a table, chair, the Lubavitcher Rebbe portrayal, etc. They would appear in all of the frames. But that's not the case according to the new God's physics paradigm, because according to the new God's physics paradigm, each pixel is computed simultaneously and separately by this universal computational or consciousness principle, which means that more massive objects or atoms or electrons or particles would be, more massive particles would be computed and presented and would be present across a much larger number of universal frames. So that means that according to the new God's physics paradigm, that's a prediction, a unique prediction that I'm sharing again here for the universities and the experimental physicists to collaborate with me in carrying out such a critical experiment. That means that for more massive particles such as the muon, it would be detected across a much greater number of what I call minimal time measurements in a subatomic accelerator than the more massive. So the more massive particles such as the muon would be detected across a greater number of fine temporal measurements in a subatomic accelerator as compared to a less massive particle such as the electron. Again, this new God's physics critical prediction cannot be explained by the old, let's say, quantum mechanics model or relativity's model, general relativity theory, which are part of the old material causal paradigm. So again, I'm calling the leading universities, experimental physicists, cosmologists, astronomers to communicate with me directly and carry out and report also the measurements that have been done in Rosh Hashanah, so that we can get a conclusive proof for the new God's physics paradigm as the valid new paradigm for 21st century physics. And we stand at a historic time, at an exciting time. This is the time for scientists, for experimental physicists, and bold experimental physicists such as Eddington, cosmologists, astronomers, to carry out these critical predictions, to communicate with me directly, and to validate this new God's physics paradigm. I think what I want to do before concluding this video is, again, just to explain to the general public as well as to the leading universities, cosmologists, physicists, astronomers. This video is specifically geared to the leading universities to collaborate, communicate, and assist me in validating this new God's physics paradigm. So I think it's very important to point out, at least in just pointers in very broad terms, the breakthrough and the theoretical significance of this new God's physics paradigm, which again is being accepted across the board more and more by universities, scientists, conferences as the new 21st century paradigm. The significance of this new God's physics paradigm is quite profound. And why? Because first of all, this is the first time in physics that the four basic physical features of space, time, energy, and mass are being completely unified. To remind the general public, Einstein, the great scientist, was able to unify between energy and mass, the known E equals mc square, energy mass equivalence. He was able to unify between space and time as a four-dimensional continuum. He was able to take space-time and show that space-time is curved by massive objects. By the way, the new God's physics paradigm replicates all of the findings, the major findings of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, but does offer an alternative explanation. So the curvature of space-time is seen in a different manner because there's no cause and effect. So there's a different explanation. It's all motivated by this higher singular universal computational consciousness principle. But what I want to highlight is that the new God's physics paradigm is able to advance beyond Einstein's great accomplishment of unifying space and time, energy and mass, curvature of space-time by massive objects, is able to advance science and our human understanding, knowledge of the universe, one very significant step forward, because it's unifying now completely between space-time, energy, and mass in one singular universal computational formula. Recently, that universal computational formula has been discovered in greater depth as comprising what I call the 10 hierarchical computational dimensions, universal computational formula. But nevertheless, at the heart of this 10 hierarchical computational dimensions, universal computational formula, there is this complete unification of space-time, energy, and mass, essentially showing that the universal consciousness principle or computational principle, UCP, computes simultaneously space-time, energy, and mass for each spatial pixel. So it's the first time in physics that space-time, energy, and mass are completely unified. That's a major accomplishment. It also unifies, by the way, between the four forces of nature. So thus far, it's related, of course, but thus far, only 3 of those have been united, and the gravitational force has been left aside, and it's a major enigma. So one of the articles, one of the 50 plus articles that I published, talks about the complete unification of the 4 forces of nature, including gravitational force, again as byproducts, computational byproducts of this singular higher order universal computational principle. It's the first time in physics that a moral principle and the centrality of human consciousness becomes a major discovery. According to this new God's physics paradigm, the UCP possesses what I call a multi-spatial temporal reservoir of all the past, present, and multiple possible futures universal frames for the whole universe from its inception until its culmination, which I'm going to speak about in a second, which is in the perfected Geula state, a morally, spiritual, physically perfected state. So the whole bank, so to speak, or reservoir of all the universal frames from the beginning of the universe until its desired ultimate goal state, the Geula perfected state, all of those pictures, all of those universal frames exist already within the universal consciousness or computational principles multi-spatial temporal reservoir, and that reservoir contains multiple possible futures for each individual human being at each moment in time. And it's the first time that we discover, physics, science discovers that the universal computational principle or consciousness principle, UCP, possesses what I call a basic dynamic equilibrium moral principle. Because the UCP is characterized by oneness, harmony, peace, morality, that's the some of the characteristics, goodwill, that's some of the characteristics, basic characteristics of this universal consciousness principle or reality. And due to that characterization, the UCP also possesses the dynamic equilibrium moral principle, which essentially says that it strives to bring humanity and the universe towards a perfected moral state in which the oneness of this universal consciousness reality or principle would be recognized by humanity. Humanity would recognize, identify, accept, live by this complete oneness and moral principle of this UCP. So that means that according to this dynamic equilibrium moral principle, whenever any individual human being carries out a moral choice, moral or immoral choice, that offsets the UCP to select one of multiple possible futures for that individual human being, or actually for those two individual human beings. And if, God forbid, an individual human being decides to inflict pain or suffering, God forbid, on another human being, that, for example, sets the UCP to select an equivalent single future for the individual human being that inflicted pain on another human being to have a similar experience, not as a punishment, but as a way of correcting and realizing and advancing that human being and the whole of humanity towards that perfected moral state, that perfected ultimate Geula state. So it's again the first time in physics history and science understanding of the universe that we have the entire bulk of all the universal frames from the beginning to the ultimate goal of the universe of reaching that Geula perfected state. All of those universal frames, including all the past, present, and multiple possible futures are embedded within this multispatial temporal reservoir of the UCP, and the UCP selects one of multiple possible futures for each individual human being in order to advance that human being and the whole of humanity towards that perfected Geula state. Again, another ramification which is very significant is that it completely unifies, for the first time in science, completely unifies between biology, physics, psychology, the rest of the sciences. They're all embedded within that essential pre-planned progression of the universe towards that perfected goal. Because according to this new God's physics paradigm, the evolution of the universe was not created by a Big Bang initial nuclear event. In fact, the new paradigm talks about an acausal computation paradigm, which negates the very possibility of the existence of material causal interactions in the real sense, because the UCP computes simultaneously all the spatial pixels in the universe simultaneously. So for each frame, all the pixels are created, are computed simultaneously. There cannot be any cause and effect between one frame and another. The whole universe dissolves back into the UCP. There cannot be any cause and effect. So the new acausal computational paradigm of the God's physics paradigm, the new paradigm for 21st century, it essentially says the universe has to be viewed and investigated in a different manner. There's no cause and effect. So the universe was not created by a Big Bang. Rather, there is an arrangement or pre-planned progression of the frames of the universe from inanimate matter to animate plants, animals, human beings, and Geula state, perfected state of humanity and science, understanding of the universe. And that evolution of the universe includes, first it's all preset and actually computed and evolved by this singular higher order universal consciousness or computational principle. So we see a complete unification. The universe was not created by the initial Big Bang nuclear event. The evolution of the species was not created by Darwin's natural selection, random mutations, again, cause and effect model. Rather, the UCP has had, from the initial state of the universe till its perfected Geula state, has a plan for the universe. And that plan is to evolve the consciousness from inanimate matter to plants, to animals, to human beings, and to humanity's perfected state of the Geula state. So it's a completely new view of the universe. It's a complete unification of the various sciences, all under the one umbrella of the UCPs guiding the universe towards a perfected state. Humanity and each individual human being possesses now a very important role, because our moral choices make a change, make a difference both in our lives, because the UCP selects one of multiple possible futures. If I act in a good way towards another human being, I specifically will get a benefit or will get an equivalent remuneration for my action, and vice versa. So humanity starts playing a very important role in leading the universe towards that perfected state. Science, in fact, and physics starts playing a key central role, because the validation of this new God's physics and the investigation, I mentioned earlier, the 10 hierarchical computational dimensions, universal computational formula, that new discovery starts highlighting the fact that there is a very complex and precious computation of the UCP at each trillionth of a second that undergoes these 10 hierarchical computational dimensions, again geared towards perfecting the world, towards assisting the world to evolve towards its perfected Geula state. So again, I'm calling here universities, leading physics universities in the world, to contact me directly. One more time, and I'd mention the email, which is drbentwich, drbentwich.com, drbentwich, drbentwich@gmail.com, to communicate with me directly and collaborate with me and advance the validation of this new God's physics paradigm. I mentioned 2 critical predictions. I'm also calling the cosmologists and astronomers to communicate and rally forth the results of the validation or of the measurement of the critical prediction of Rosh Hashanah. And I think we stand at a critical juncture. I'm very hopeful and faithful that this new God's physics paradigm will be validated, and that would lead humanity and science towards a much broader understanding, exciting new understanding of the universe and of our very special role as human beings in advancing the universe towards its perfected Geula state. Thank you very much.